Hi! I'm Rose, and today we're going to be doing some experimental wood carving with some extreme budget tools. I've got a butter knife and a spoon I've made into a carving knife and a gouge. They cost me $1 each. I cut off this section of this here driftwood. Now let's see what we can make out of it. First things first, I think I'm just going to kind of skin our little branch here with our knife. Just going to go down along the length of it. Now that we're a bit stripped down, what I'm going to try to do is a bit of batoning to shape this up right. And by batoning, what I mean is I'm going to take a stick, I'm going to take my knife, I'm going to lay it down along the end grain here, and I'm going to try to bash it down along the length of the wood. Now we're just going to carve down along this and just clean up the edges of our split sections. We've got flat sides at least. So now that we've done that and we're starting to get a bit of a handle shape going on right now, I'm going to start with our gouge. And the goal is we're going to carve a channel up the sides on each side of our flats here. Give some place for our fingers to sit. See how well it works. With that, we pretty much have a handle shape down. We could make whatever we want out of this. I, however, want to decorate a bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the first piece of our hardware, which is going to be an ice screw. These are quite simple and self-explanatory. All I'm going to do is I'm going to bear down really hard and get it started down. Trying to make sure we're nice and centered in our handle. And we're going to screw it in. And then stick a tool through it to make it easier. And if your wood splits, well, so be it. We could sign it up and call it George, but instead I'm going to go back and burn it. If you remember how we burned it from episode 1, same way, same rocket stove. And you just slowly roast your wood. I prefer kind of a medium rare with plenty of the original color showing through, but to each their own. Now that it's been toasted, we're going to have to sand the char off. For that, I'm going to use this 100 grit sanding sponge. You could use any kind of sandpaper or a file or anything really. I just like these sponges because they work pretty well and they're cheap. Last, we'll treat it with a bit of oil just to make it look nice and pretty. Personally, I quite like novelties and think everyone should have a flogging good time. With that in mind, I'm going to make some rope. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this jute twine and I'm going to go about 1.5 spans across, which for me is about 9 feet. I'm going to take these, I'm going to cut about 5 of them, I think. We're going to dye them. We're going to braid them, and we're going to make something. We're going to dye our rope with the charcoal from our fire before. What we're going to do is we're going to take our rocket stove, we're going to empty it into a plastic bag. We're going to take all that charcoal mixture, and we're going to beat it up with a stick. The goal is to mash it into as fine a powder as we can. So what I've done next is cut the bottom off of a can, left the hole in the bottom in it, and we're going to shove a coffee filter down in here. Try to keep it as open as you can. And we're going to load our charcoal into that. And if some gets around the sides, that'll be fine. Next, we're going to pour hot water through it to just slowly steep out our nice black charcoal water dye, which will impart a darkening onto our rope, but not make it the color of the charcoal, really. You don't want your dye mixture to break apart your rope, so it's important to let it cool. If you can't stick a finger in it, you can't stick your rope in it yet. Take all your twine, lay it down in there, and then just grab a rock or something similar to force it all down into our dye. And we're going to leave that sit for a good long while and soak through. While we do that, I have another project for us to work on. What I want to do is make beads. So what I did is I split another piece of our driftwood into halves and then into quarters. Then I cut those quarters into little chunks and drilled some holes through them. And now I'm going to use our butter knife again. I'm going to square these down, then I'm going to carve them. We're going to make something. So whenever making anything that might take an impact, wood grain is incredibly important. Now, I cut these so that our points would be going down along the grain and ending with our end grain, like this one here. Then there's the other option, which would be to try to make your points sideways along the side grain, which would be this one. Now, there's reasons for both, and there's a very strong reason why I went with this one. First off, if something hits on the point, say, like our bead here, well, as you can see with this, it stays rigid, versus if it was along the grain, it would just fold up and move. And that would dull and blunten our tip. The second reason is if it takes any kind of other lateral force. See, if we try to tear this, the lengths of the grain, the stacks of cells, hold it together. Versus this, where if any kind of side force impacts, it just comes apart. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your blade at an angle, and start about halfway down, just start shaving off while rotating around. And the goal is just to round it out. And I find it easiest to keep going back and forth so you don't end up with too fine a point and then tip it over sideways. But whatever works for you. And once one end gets too sharp to really stabilize it, just pick it up in your fingers and start going around, whittling the other one. Then we're going to take our danger almond back to the sandpaper and just kind of smooth it out on the sponge. You end up with something kind of like that. Then just a hint of oil to finish it off. The twine's been dyeing for about an hour. I think that should be enough to get the color I want. So we're going to take it out. Ooh. We're going to go dry it. Now I want to do another entirely unnecessary step. I'm going to wax these pieces of rope. And that's just to make them come together real nice. I'm not going to do it too specially. I'm just going to run some wax down the length of it. They're all going to get some. And then when we weave them together, it'll all kind of squeeze out between them too. Just brought the jute back out to compare it against our dyed rope, which is quite a lot grayer and darker. I like it. What we're going to do is we're going to take a strand, and we're going to 3-strand brand it. We're going to tie a stopper knot, and then we're going to weave in our beads. Let me show you how. What I want you to do is you're going to take a loop in your rope, which in rope terms we call a bite. You take that and then one of your ends. You're going to line them up. Then you're just going to try to draw that loose end and that loop out between your two hands till you end up with both sides pretty much even, with one end sitting in one loop. And overlay it so you have this setup here. You're going to take your rope on your right, you're going to fold it over the center one, then you're going to take the one from the right, fold it over the one you just folded over. Tighten that up. And you're going to keep that pattern. Left to center, right over what was left, which is now center, so on and so forth. Now, because we started with a bite and a free end, we have this really nice clean end shape going on. Now, if you lined it up perfectly, both ends will end up being just this tight and this clean without any little extra dangly bits. And if your loose end is too long, you can always snip it short. But in this situation, we're not going to worry about this end because we have other plans for this end of the line. So what we're going to do, just to make it a bit easier, we're just going to cut the remaining loop. And while this is nice and pretty, I don't really trust it in the event of an impact. So what we're going to do is just tie a simple overhand knot. You just loop it over itself, and then through, and then pull all that tight. End up with something kind of like that. Unravel any extra braid you have up to the point of your knot. Then find your center line and install your first bead. From there, you're going to continue braiding as if it wasn't there. Just remembering to pull the lines tight around it. Should end up with this kind of caged look right here. After the space of about 2 fingers, I'm going to find the center line again and install another bead. Then repeat the process a second time. However, this time it's important to follow the existing path. So you see, we pulled our center from the right to the left, so now we got to make sure we start with our left side, go right. Otherwise, we'll end up with a kink in our rope. Second verse, same as the first. From there, once you've added as many beads as you want, and I'm going to do 3 each, we're just going to keep braiding all the way down. Though I want to tie an extra knot right underneath the last bead, just for the sake of visual balance. Once you've made a bunch of these, you might decide that, wow, those are a lot of work, and they're awesome. But also maybe we need some filler. So for that, we're just going to go back to our undyed jute, and we're just going to do the same thing, but we're not going to have any beads, and we're just going to leave it after we do that top overhand knot, then braid our way all the way down to give ourselves some filler falls. It should end up looking something kind of like this. Once you reach towards the end of what will be your falls, I want you to take the center line of your rope. You're going to feed it through the eye of your hardware eye and onto your handle, and you're going to treat it just like you treated the beads from before. So we're going to take it, and we're going to start folding over. And we're just going to weave the rest of the rope down, treating it like it's barely there. Get it on like so. Then we're going to take that little bit of excess we have, we're going to wrap it around. We're going to tie ourselves another overhand knot. Then just trim off the excess. And you have a handy attachment. Now I just have to do that a whole bunch more times. And like that, you too could have your very own kind of primal cat o' nine tails. Look at that. Isn't she pretty? Well, here we are at the end. I brought out the paddle from episode 1 just to keep things in frame, but really what we're here to talk about is these. The butter knives and the spoon gouges that are really the whole point of this video. I wanted to bring them to light to show that you really don't need expensive and fancy tools to get started in order to make anything. The tools are nice. Don't get me wrong. I love my expensive and fancy tools. But you don't need them, especially when you're starting it. Some thoughts. One being our butter knives here. I made 2 of everything just to make sure the metallurgy wasn't giving me lies with one. Like I had some particularly nice butter knife and another one that was an average butter knife would be terrible. I'm really happy with these. I don't think they're particularly deficient in any way. Once a edge was rubbed into them, they work as well as any carving knife really would. Well, any large carving knife anyway, for big whittling work. The spoon gouges were a bit more of an adventure. They work reasonably well. The problem with them is, well, the angle of the handle. As you can see, this is the one that I used to make the handle with here on our cat o' nine tails. And this is the design that I think is best with this large bend. So you can hit here and kind of baton down with it. The problem is the offset makes it difficult to control and really bite into wood with. The solution is to hit down here, and I think to make this really like a usable tool, I'm going to slot a wooden handle over it. So that'll happen. I tried a different design with this smaller guy. You can see I bent the handle down and then back up again so I could hit the handle, and my thought was that this would offer a fairly stable kind of tool path. The problem was, well, there's a few problems. One is since this is an angled piece, it doesn't really go forward. It tries to shove it up, which kind of screws you over. The second being is that this made it a lot smaller, and these little corners here are sharp, and there's some consequences to that. Personally, I heal quick, but don't do this. Stick with this design. Funnily enough, the smaller spoon cuts much better and much faster, so if you are making a gouge, probably trying to find a small little spoon like this. Either way, be careful, kids. And then lastly, just to address someone who's here to build something like this, this costs basically nothing. The most expensive thing I used here, aside from the wax that I put on, which you don't need, but does make the ropes nicer, would be the jute rope itself, which I bought for $2. The driftwood is all free. I burnt it for free, and, well, the tools cost me about 50 cents since I only made it using these two fellows here. These were a side experiment. This took a fair amount of time, though. Like, these beads here, each one of these takes about 15 to 20 minutes. So really, each one of these falls with beads on it represents about an hour. The handle probably took, maybe 45 minutes. And then tying the falls together probably takes another hour, hour and a half. This isn't a low time investment, but it is a low monetary investment. So if that works out for you, great. And I think that's about all I have to say. So, yeah. Hope to see you guys in the next one, where I think we're going to go into the basics of saws.